What if I told you that 11 people went missing at rest stops across America in ways that make absolutely no sense? Tonight, I'm sharing the most disturbing true rest stop encounters ever documented. These aren't urban legends. These are real police reports, real missing persons cases, and real security footage that law enforcement still can't explain. By the end of this video, you'll never look at highway rest stops the same way again. But first, let me tell you about Marlo Chen's final text message. The last text that made police reopen a closed case. Marlo Chen was driving from Denver to Phoenix when she stopped at the Riverside Rest Area in Utah at 24:07 a.m. Security cameras show her walking toward the restrooms, phone in hand. What they captured next defied everything investigators thought they knew about missing persons cases. Marlo's final text to her sister read, "There's a woman in the mirror behind me, but when I turn around she's not there. She's wearing my clothes. She's wearing MYFC." The message was sent at 2:41 a.m. Security footage shows Marlo entering an empty restroom. She never came out, but here's where it gets disturbing. At 2:52 a.m., cameras captured someone walking out of that restroom. Someone who looked exactly like Marlo Chen, wearing her exact clothes, carrying her exact purse. This person got into Marlo's Honda Civic and drove away. The license plate matched. The car was identical. Even the small dent on the rear bumper was perfect. 3 days later, Marlo's car was found abandoned 200 miles away. Inside, investigators found Marlo's driver's license, credit cards, and personal belongings. But they also found something that made their blood run cold: a second driver's license with Marlo's photo and information, but slightly different. The eye color was wrong. The height was off by 2 inches, and the signature didn't match. The real Marlo Chen has never been found. But here's what haunts investigators most. That security footage of the person leaving the restroom. When they enhanced the image and studied it frame by frame, they noticed something impossible. The person walking out cast no reflection in the restroom's mirror behind her. The case officially remains open. The Riverside Rest Area was permanently closed 6 months later after 3 more similar incidents occurred. Local authorities refused to discuss why. Three families disappeared in one night. Their cars were still running. The Hendricks family, the Rodriguez family, and the Park family had never met each other. They were traveling different routes, headed to different destinations. Yet on the same October night, all 3 families stopped at rest areas within a 50-mile radius of each other. None of them were ever seen again. At the Moonridge rest stop, the Hendricks family's SUV was found with the engine running, doors unlocked, and dinner still warm on the picnic table. 8-year-old Emma Hendricks had left her favorite teddy bear on the passenger seat. Her parents, James and Linda, had apparently vanished mid-bite during their roadside meal. 40 miles south, the Rodriguez family's minivan sat idling at the Pine Valley Rest Area. Mario Rodriguez's purse was open on the front seat, credit cards scattered as if she'd been searching for something urgently. Her husband Carlos's coffee was still steaming in the cup holder. Their twin daughters' tablets were paused in the middle of a cartoon. The Park family's sedan at the Wildwood rest stop told the same impossible story. Professor David Park, his wife Susan, and their teenage son Kevin had simply evaporated. David's research papers were spread across the picnic table, held down by stones as if he'd been organizing them when something interrupted him. Security cameras at all 3 locations showed the same disturbing pattern. Each family arrived normally parked and began their activities. Then, between 11:43 p.m. and 11:47 p.m., the cameras experienced identical 4-minute blackouts. When the feeds resumed, the families were gone, but their belongings remained untouched. But investigators discovered something that made national headlines. In each abandoned vehicle, they found a handwritten note that none of the family members could have written. The notes were identical, written in perfect cursive that matched no one's handwriting. They chose to stay. The rest stop has been so lonely. DNA analysis of the paper revealed something impossible. The notes contained genetic material from all three families, but arranged in patterns that suggested the DNA had been deliberately woven into the paper fibers during manufacturing. The paper itself was dated 1952, decades before DNA testing existed. The three rest stops now sit abandoned. Local police patrol them regularly, but they refuse to enter after dark. Highway signs redirect traffic around these areas, though the official reason given is always road maintenance. This truck driver lived the same hour 47 times. Vernon Blackstone had been driving trucks for 23 years. He knew every rest stop between Seattle and Los Angeles like the back of his weathered hands. But on March 15th, Vernon experienced something that made him question everything he thought he knew about reality. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Vernon pulled into the Desert Wind Rest area in Nevada. He needed coffee and a 15-minute break before pushing through to his morning delivery. The rest stop was empty except for a single car with Oregon plates. Vernon bought coffee from the vending machine, used the restroom, and returned to his truck. As he started the engine, his dashboard clock read 3:32 a.m. But when Vernon pulled back onto the highway, something impossible happened. The mile markers began counting backward. The digital clock on his radio flickered and reset to 3:17 a.m. Within minutes, Vernon found himself approaching the same Desert Wind Rest area again, as if he'd never left. Confused but rational, Vernon assumed he'd taken a wrong turn in his fatigue. He stopped again, bought another coffee, and carefully studied his map. The route was correct. He'd driven this exact path hundreds of times. Yet when he merged back onto the highway, the same impossible loop repeated. 3:17 a.m., the same empty rest stop, the same car with Oregon plates parked in the exact same spot. By the seventh loop, Vernon began documenting everything. He wrote detailed notes about each repetition, photographed the Oregon car, and even approached the vehicle to peer inside empty. No driver anywhere, but the engine was warm as if someone had just stepped away. The loops continued. Vernon tried different routes, different exits, even driving in the opposite direction. Nothing worked. Each time, reality bent around him like a twisted highway, delivering him back to 3:17 a.m. at the Desert Wind Rest area. On the 23rd loop, Vernon noticed changes. The Oregon car's license plate number was different. The vending machine dispensed different brands of coffee. The restroom graffiti changed between visits. It was as if he was experiencing slightly different versions of the same moment. By the 40th loop, Vernon was documenting messages that appeared on the restroom mirror between visits. Messages written in his own handwriting, but saying things he'd never written. Stop trying to leave. This is where you belong. The highway doesn't want you anymore. On the 47th loop, Vernon made a desperate decision. Instead of leaving the rest area, he stayed. He sat in his truck and waited. At exactly 4:17 a.m., 1 hour after the loops began, Vernon watched the Oregon car's driver door open. A figure that looked exactly like Vernon Blackstone stepped out, walked to the rest stop, bought coffee from the vending machine, and disappeared into the restroom. Vernon was found 3 days later by Highway Patrol, sitting in his truck at the Desert Wind Rest area. He was conscious but unresponsive, staring at his dashboard clock, which was frozen at 3:17 a.m. Medical evaluation revealed that Vernon had aged exactly 47 hours despite only 3 days passing in real time. Vernon never drove again. He now lives in a small town outside Reno, and he swears that every clock in his house stops at 3:17 a.m., if only for a moment, every single night. Security guard found 200 hours of footage that shouldn't exist. Dominic Ashford worked night security at the Grand Mesa Rest area in Colorado. It was a quiet job that paid well, and Dom appreciated the solitude after spending years as a city police officer. But what he discovered during his routine equipment check changed everything he thought he knew about the facility he was protecting. While reviewing security footage for his monthly report, Dom noticed something odd about the women's restroom camera feeds. The timestamp showed continuous recording, but the files were enormous, far larger than they should be for the minimal activity in that location. When Dom investigated, he discovered that the restroom cameras were recording footage that wasn't happening in real time. The bathroom mirror was capturing reflections of people who weren't there. Not invisible people, the cameras clearly showed empty restrooms, but the mirrors were reflecting dozens of different women, all using the facility, washing their hands, fixing their hair, and having conversations with people who didn't exist. Dom documented everything meticulously. He captured screenshots of women in 1970s clothing using mirrors that reflected modern fixtures. He recorded audio of conversations in languages he couldn't identify, discussing places that didn't exist. Most disturbing were the women, who seemed to be looking directly at Dom through the camera, despite the fact that they weren't physically present in the room. Over 3 months, Dom accumulated over 200 hours of impossible footage. The mirror reflections showed patterns that defied physics. Some women appeared to be brushing their teeth with toiletries from decades past. Others were crying about events that wouldn't happen for years. A few seemed to be trying to communicate warnings, pointing at the camera and mouthing words that Dom couldn't lip-read. But the most disturbing discovery came when Dom recognized one of the women in the mirror reflections. It was his ex-wife Patricia, who had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. Patricia appeared in the mirror wearing the blue dress Dom had buried her in, but she was visibly pregnant, something that had been impossible due to a medical condition she'd had since birth. In the reflection, Patricia was trying to tell him something urgent. She kept pointing to a specific location in the restroom, the third stall from the left. When Dom investigated that stall during his next shift, he found scratches on the inside of the door. Fresh scratches that spelled out a message. DMC Pesca Ts Meltius. Grand Mesa Rest Area had no basement. Dom had worked there for 2 years and knew every inch of the facility. But when he used ground-penetrating equipment borrowed from the highway department, he discovered a sealed room directly beneath the women's restroom. Inside that hidden room, Dom found hundreds of missing person files dating back to 1962. All women, all last seen at highway rest stops throughout Colorado. And in the center of the room sat an antique mirror, identical to the one in the women's restroom above, but cracked down the middle. Dom reported his discovery to state authorities, but when they arrived to investigate, the basement room was gone. The ground-penetrating equipment showed only solid earth beneath the building. The security footage Dom had carefully documented had mysteriously corrupted, showing only static. Dom quit his job that day. The Grand Mesa Rest Area hired a replacement, but the new security guard lasted only 2 weeks before disappearing entirely. The facility now operates without overnight security. The women's restroom mirror was replaced, but staff report that the new mirror sometimes shows reflections of empty stalls even when people are using the facilities. They only work after midnight, and they're not supposed to exist. Cassandra Thorne was driving cross country when her car broke down near the Sunset Ridge Rest Area in Montana. With no cell service and a dead battery, she had no choice but to walk to the rest area and hope for help. What she discovered there challenged everything she thought she knew about highway maintenance operations. At 12:30 a.m., Cassandra watched a crew of 6 maintenance workers emerge from unmarked white vans. They immediately began what appeared to be routine upkeep, emptying trash cans, cleaning restrooms, and maintaining landscaping. But their methods were anything but routine. The workers moved in perfect synchronization, as if choreographed. They never spoke to each other, yet they coordinated complex tasks with impossible precision. When one worker encountered a broken light fixture, another would appear instantly with the exact replacement part, without any apparent communication between them. Cassandra tried to approach the crew for help, but something stopped her. The workers' movements were too fluid, too precise. They bent at angles that seemed wrong for human anatomy. And despite the Montana winter, they wore only thin coveralls with no visible company logos or name tags. From her hiding spot behind a picnic table, Cassandra watched the crew work with tools she couldn't identify. One worker was cleaning windows with a device that made glass completely transparent, not just clean, but perfectly invisible. Another was trimming bushes with what looked like scissors made of light, cutting through branches without any physical contact. The most disturbing thing Cassandra witnessed was the trash disposal. The workers weren't emptying garbage cans, they were making the trash disappear completely. One worker would hold a bag of waste, wave his hand over it, and the bag would simply cease to exist. No disposal truck, no dumpster. The refuse vanished as if it had never been created. But what made Cassandra's blood run cold was what happened at 3:00 a.m. The workers suddenly stopped their activities and turned in perfect unison to look directly at her hiding place. 6 identical faces stared at her with expressions of mild curiosity. Not anger or surprise, just quiet interest, as if they were studying an unexpected insect. One worker began walking toward her. His footsteps made no sound on the gravel. As he approached, Cassandra could see that his coveralls weren't fabric at all, but something that moved like liquid while maintaining a solid appearance. The worker's name tag read Auntie Nancy E in letters that seemed to shift and change as she stared at them. The worker stopped 3 feet away and spoke in a voice that sounded like multiple people talking in perfect harmony. Your vehicle requires assistance. This will be provided. You should not observe night maintenance operations. This creates complications. Cassandra blinked, and suddenly she was sitting in her car, which was running perfectly. Her phone showed full battery and several missed calls from concerned family members. According to her phone's timestamp, she had lost exactly 2.5 hours. The Sunset Ridge rest area was empty and perfectly maintained, as if the maintenance crew had never existed. When Cassandra reported the incident to highway authorities, she was told that the Sunset Ridge rest area was maintained by a private contractor during daytime hours only. No crew was authorized for overnight work. Security cameras showed Cassandra arriving with a broken-down car, sitting motionless in the driver's seat for 2.5 hours, then driving away normally. The cameras captured no maintenance crew whatsoever, but Cassandra knows what she saw. And sometimes, when she drives past rest areas after midnight, she glimpses white vans parked just out of sight of the main facilities. She never stops to investigate. Some maintenance work, she learned, is better left unobserved. Her phone recorded calls she never made to numbers that don't exist. Imogene Walsh discovered that some dead zones are more dead than others when her phone began making impossible calls at the Whispering Pines rest area in Oregon. What started as a simple communication problem became a window into conversations that shouldn't exist. Imogene first noticed the problem during a routine stop while driving to visit her elderly mother. Her phone showed no signal bars, which was normal for this stretch of highway. But when she returned to her car, her phone's call log showed 3 outgoing calls, each lasting over 20 minutes. The numbers weren't in her contacts, and when she tried calling them back, she got a recording saying the numbers had never been assigned. Curious and slightly concerned, Imogen decided to test the phenomenon. She returned to the rest area the following week, this time paying careful attention to her phone. At exactly 4:45 p.m., while her phone showed 0 bars and no network connection, it began dialing a number automatically. The call connected, and Imogen could hear conversation on the other end. But the voice she heard was her own. She was listening to herself having an animated conversation with someone named Marcus about a house fire that had never happened. The other Imogen was describing details of an event that sounded terrifyingly real: the smell of smoke, the sound of breaking glass, the panic of trying to save family photos. But Imogen had never experienced a house fire, and she knew no one named Marcus. Over the course of several visits, Imogen discovered that her phone was connecting to what seemed like alternate versions of her own life. In one call, she listened to herself discussing a job at a veterinary clinic in Portland, a job she'd interviewed for but never gotten. In another, she was planning a wedding to someone named David, though Imogen had never dated anyone by that name. The conversations became increasingly disturbing as the alternate versions of herself began discussing events that felt more like warnings than memories. One version was frantically telling Marcus about the thing that lives in rest-stop mirrors. Another was sobbing while describing how she never should have stopped at Whispering Pines that first time. But the most chilling call came during Imogene's 7th visit. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't just another version of herself, it was herself from the future. The future Imogene was trying to warn her about something that would happen next Tuesday at the rest area. The call was breaking up, but Imogene could make out crucial words. Don't go alone, bring the mirror, and he's been waiting since 1987. Imogene never found out what the warnings meant. On the Tuesday her future self had referenced, she was in a car accident 3 miles before reaching the Whispering Pines rest area. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital with minor injuries. When she recovered and finally returned to the rest area, her phone behaved normally. No mysterious calls, no alternate versions of herself. But Imogene's phone records told a different story. Her cellular provider confirmed that during her visits to the rest area, her phone had been making calls to numbers that existed in their system, but had never been assigned to customers. The calls were routing through cell towers that had been decommissioned in 1987, the same year the future Imogen had mentioned. Most disturbing of all, when technicians analyzed the call audio that Imogen had recorded, they discovered something impossible. The background noise in all the calls contained sounds that matched the acoustic profile of the Whispering Pines rest area, not just the facility as it exists now, but as it had existed during various periods of renovation and construction over the past 30 years. Imogene's phone was somehow connecting across time as well as parallel realities. The dead zone at Whispering Pines wasn't blocking cellular signals, it was receiving all of them, from every possible version of reality, all at once. The rest area remains operational, but highway authorities have installed warnings about unreliable cell service. They don't mention that the unreliable service sometimes connects travelers to versions of themselves they were never meant to meet. He fell asleep at a rest stop and woke up 30 years earlier. Quentin Rivers thought he was just taking a power nap when he pulled into the Cedar Point rest area during a late-night drive. What should have been a 20-minute rest became a journey through time that left investigators with more questions than answers. Quentin had been driving for 12 hours straight, moving from Chicago to his new job in San Francisco. Exhaustion was setting in, and the Cedar Point rest area offered a safe place to close his eyes for a few minutes. He parked under a streetlight, locked his doors, and set his phone alarm for 20 minutes. When he closed his eyes, it was 2:47 a.m. on November 15, 2023. When Quentin woke up, everything was wrong. His Tesla Model 3 had become a 1993 Ford Taurus. His smartphone was gone, replaced by a flip phone that showed the date as November 15, 1993. His modern clothes had been replaced by a flannel shirt and jeans he'd never owned. Even his driver's license showed a 1993 issue date with a photo that looked like him, but younger. The Cedar Point rest area looked the same but different. The basic layout was identical, but the vending machines were older models, the restroom fixtures were from a different era, and the parking lot was filled with cars from the early 1990s. Other travelers moved normally through the facility, but they were all dressed and behaving as if the year really was 1993. Quentin's attempts to explain his situation to other travelers met with confused stares. When he tried to describe smartphones, electric cars, or recent historical events, people looked at him as if he was suffering from a mental breakdown. According to everyone around him, Bill Clinton was president. The internet was something used primarily by universities, and nobody had heard of Google or Tesla. Most disturbing was what happened when Quentin tried to leave. The highways looked correct, but they led to a version of the world locked in 1993. Cities appeared as they had 30 years ago. Technology, fashion, music, everything was consistent with that time period. Quentin wasn't just dreaming or hallucinating. He was experiencing a fully realized version of the past. But there were inconsistencies that proved this wasn't simply time travel. Quentin encountered people who were alive in this 1993 world but had died in his timeline. Conversely, some people who should have been alive in 1993 were missing entirely. History had been altered in subtle but significant ways, as if this was a parallel 1993 rather than the actual past. The most chilling discovery came when Quentin found a newspaper from this alternate 1993. The headline read, "Time Traveler Claims to be from 2023 Found Dead at Rest Area." The article described a man matching Quentin's description who had appeared at the Cedar Point Rest Area claiming to be from the future. The man had been found dead in his car 3 days after arrival, apparently from natural causes, despite being young and healthy. Quentin realized he was living through a loop that had already been completed. Somewhere in this alternate 1993, his story had already ended tragically. He was experiencing events that had already been documented as historical fact in this timeline. Desperate to escape, Quentin returned to the Cedar Point Rest Area and attempted to recreate exactly the conditions of his original nap. He parked in the same spot, set the same 20-minute alarm, and forced himself to fall asleep despite his terror. When Quentin woke up, he was back in his Tesla in 2023. His phone showed dozens of missed calls from family and friends who had been worried about his 24-hour disappearance. But according to his car's GPS logs, he had never left the Cedar Point Rest Area parking lot. Quentin reported his experience to authorities, but they found no evidence of time displacement. Security cameras showed him arriving, sleeping in his car for exactly 24 hours, and then leaving normally. There were no gaps in the footage, no signs of the 1993 world he had experienced. But Quentin kept one piece of evidence that nobody could explain. In his pocket, he found a newspaper from the alternate 1993, the one with his own obituary. The paper was real, printed on authentic 1990s newsprint with a date that was impossible. Carbon dating confirmed the paper was indeed from 1993, but it contained information about technologies and events that didn't exist until decades later. The Cedar Point Rest Area remains open and unremarkable. Quentin never stopped there again. But sometimes, late-night travelers report experiencing unusual dreams when they nap at the facility. Dreams that feel more real than reality, set in times they've never lived through, in versions of the world that never quite existed. "911 received 47 calls from the same dead person. The Emergency Dispatch Center in Riverside County, California, began receiving impossible calls on March 3rd when Tabitha Nguyen's voice started reporting emergencies that weren't happening from a phone that should have been destroyed in her fatal car accident 6 months earlier. Tabitha had died in a single car rollover near the Mountain View Rest Area in October. Her phone was recovered from the wreckage, completely destroyed and beyond repair. The case was closed as an unfortunate accident on a dangerous stretch of highway known for weather-related crashes. But on that March evening, Tabitha's voice began calling 911 from her old phone number. The first call came at 6:23 p.m. "This is Tabitha Nguyen. There's been an accident at Mountain View Rest Area. A car has rolled over. The driver is trapped and seriously injured. Please send help immediately." Emergency responders were dispatched, but they found no accident. The Mountain View Rest Area was quiet and empty. No damaged vehicles, no injured drivers, no signs of any emergency whatsoever. Dispatch assumed the call was a hoax, despite the caller ID showing Tabitha's verified phone number. The calls continued over the following weeks, always reporting accidents or emergencies at rest areas throughout the region. Tabitha's voice was clear and consistent, providing detailed locations and descriptions of incidents that responders never found. Each call was logged as coming from her destroyed phone, which was still locked in the evidence room at the county sheriff's department. But the calls began showing a disturbing pattern. Tabitha was describing accidents that sounded increasingly similar to her own fatal crash. She reported cars rolling over on curves during rainstorms, single vehicles leaving roadways for no apparent reason, and drivers being trapped in wreckage that first responders couldn't locate. The breakthrough came when emergency medical technician Rodriguez decided to analyze the call times and locations. Every emergency that Tabitha reported occurred at the exact time and place where real accidents had happened in previous years. She was calling in accidents from the past accidents that had already been resolved, investigated, and closed, but then the calls began predicting future accidents. On April 15th, Tabitha called to report a multi-car collision at the Desert Springs rest area that wouldn't happen for 3 more days. When that accident occurred exactly as she had described, emergency services were already prepared and responded in record time. Lives were saved because of advance warning from a dead woman. The most chilling call came on April 22nd. Tabitha's voice was different, more urgent, more frightened than in previous calls. "This is Tabitha Nangayan. I need to report my own accident. I can see it happening. Mountain View Rest Area, October 15th, 6:47 p.m. My car is going to leave the roadway on the sharp curve near mile marker 23. I'm going to die, and I need someone to know that it wasn't an accident." The dispatcher tried to keep Tabitha on the line, but the call ended abruptly. When investigators reviewed the recording, they discovered something impossible. In the background of the call, they could hear sounds that matched the audio from Tabitha's actual 911 call on the night she died, the same call they had in their archives from 6 months earlier. Tabitha was somehow calling from inside her own death, reporting her accident while it was happening, but with the knowledge and perspective of someone who had already experienced the full event. Investigators reopened Tabitha's case and discovered evidence they had missed. Brake lines that appeared to have been deliberately severed, tire marks that suggested her car had been forced off the road by another vehicle. What they had classified as an accident was actually murder. The calls from Tabitha's phone stopped after her case was reclassified as a homicide investigation. But the evidence room where her destroyed phone was stored began experiencing unexplained phenomena. Staff reported hearing faint ringing sounds from the evidence lockers, and security cameras occasionally captured brief flashes of light from the area where Tabitha's phone was kept. The Mountain View Rest Area now has additional safety barriers and improved lighting around the curve where Tabitha died. A small memorial plaque was installed, though it doesn't mention the 911 calls that helped solve her murder. Some things, authorities decided, are better left unexplained in official records, but emergency dispatchers throughout the region know the truth. Sometimes the dead call for help not for themselves, but for others who might follow the same tragic path. They continue to take every call seriously, even when the caller ID shows impossible numbers from phones that no longer exist. She met herself at a rest stop, but the other her had different memories. When Ofelia Martinez encountered her exact duplicate at the Crossroads Rest Area in New Mexico, she discovered that some coincidences are too impossible to be accidental and too real to be ignored. Ofelia was driving home to Albuquerque after visiting her grandmother in Las Cruces when she stopped for gas and a bathroom break. As she walked toward the rest area facilities, she saw a woman who made her stop dead in her tracks. The woman looked exactly like Ofelia, same height, same build, same hair color and style, even the same small scar on her left cheek from a childhood accident. But this wasn't just a strong resemblance, this was identical. The woman was wearing the same blue sweater Ofelia had on, carrying the same brown leather purse, and walking with the same slight limp Ofelia had developed after a running injury. It was like looking into a perfect mirror, except the reflection was moving independently. The other Ofelia noticed her staring and approached with a friendly smile. "You look exactly like me," she said, laughing. "This is incredible. Are you from around here?" What followed was a conversation that began as amusing and became increasingly disturbing. The other Ofelia, who also went by Ofelia Martinez, had the same birth date, the same parents' names, and had grown up in the same house in Albuquerque, but her memories diverged from the real Ophelia's in subtle but significant ways. The other Ophelia remembered their childhood dog being named Cisco instead of Cisco. She recalled their father working as a mechanic rather than an electrician. She had memories of their grandmother living in Santa Fe instead of Las Cruces. Every major life event was similar but shifted, as if she was from a parallel version of Ophelia's life. Most unsettling was when they compared driver's licenses. Both had identical photos and signatures, but different license numbers. Both IDs appeared authentic, complete with proper holograms and state verification codes. It was as if the Department of Motor Vehicles had somehow issued legitimate documents to the same person twice. The other Ophelia suggested they take a selfie together to document the bizarre encounter. But when Ophelia looked at the photo on her phone, something was wrong. The image showed only one person, herself. The other Ophelia wasn't visible in the photo at all, despite standing right beside her when the picture was taken. "That's strange," said the other Ophelia, looking at her own phone. "My photo shows only me too. It's like you're not there." Both women had identical phones showing identical photos of themselves alone, despite both being present when the pictures were taken. The technology was somehow unable to capture them together, as if reality itself was rejecting the possibility of their coexistence. The conversation continued for over an hour, with each woman sharing increasingly different versions of the same life experiences. The other Ophelia had attended different schools, dated different people, and chosen different career paths, but always in ways that felt like alternative versions of Ophelia's actual decisions. But the most chilling moment came when the other Ophelia mentioned her grandmother's recent death. "I'm actually driving back from her funeral," she said sadly. "Grandma Rosa passed away 3 days ago." Ophelia's blood ran cold. She was driving back from visiting Grandma Rosa, who was very much alive and had served her lunch just hours earlier. According to the other Ophelia, their grandmother had died from the same heart condition that ran in their family. But 3 days ago, instead of being alive and healthy. "I think I need to go," Ophelia said, suddenly terrified by the implications of this encounter. "Me too," agreed the other Ophelia. "This is getting too weird." Both women walked to their cars, identical Honda Accords parked side by side. Same model, same color, same small dent on the rear bumper. But the license plates were different, from different states that neither woman had ever lived in. Ophelia got into her car and immediately called her grandmother. Rosa answered on the second ring, very much alive and wondering why Ophelia was calling so soon after her visit. But when Ophelia looked in her rearview mirror as she drove away, she saw the other Ophelia's car behind her, and the car was empty. No driver, but moving normally through traffic. When Ophelia reached home, she found something waiting for her that made her question everything. On her kitchen table sat a sympathy card addressed to her, expressing condolences for her grandmother's passing. The card was signed by relatives she recognized, but it was dated 3 days ago, the same day the other Ophelia claimed their grandmother had died. Ophelia never returned to the Crossroads rest area, but sometimes, when she passes mirrors in public places, she sees the other Ophelia in the reflection, living out slightly different versions of the same life. The other Ophelia always waves and sometimes mouths words that look like, "I'm sorry for your loss." Ophelia's grandmother is still alive, but Ophelia keeps that sympathy card as a reminder that somewhere, in some version of reality, she's living through a different timeline where the people she loves have different fates. Her GPS led her to a rest stop that doesn't exist on any map. Technology failed Penelope Jong in ways that defied logical explanation when her GPS navigation system guided her to a rest area that couldn't be found in any official records, yet felt more real than reality itself. Penelope was driving from Sacramento to Lake Tahoe for a weekend retreat when her car's GPS began acting erratically. The screen flickered between different route options, constantly recalculating her destination despite her staying on the same highway. Then, At 9:23 p.m., the device announced in its mechanical voice, "In 500 feet, turn right to Silverbrook Rest Area for optimal route efficiency." Penelope had driven this route dozens of times and knew there was no rest area at that location. But her GPS was insistent, showing a detailed exit ramp and facility that she'd never noticed before. Curious and needing a break anyway, she decided to follow the directions. The exit ramp appeared exactly where her GPS indicated, complete with official highway signs reading, "Silverbrook Rest Area, next right." But something felt wrong immediately. The signs looked new yet somehow aged, as if they'd been recently installed but weathered by decades of use. The rest area itself was immaculate and well maintained, with modern facilities and beautiful landscaping. Other travelers were using the facility normally, families with children, truck drivers, elderly couples stretching their legs. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary except for one impossible detail. According to Penelope's phone, she had no GPS signal at all. Her car's navigation system showed her exact location at the Silverbrook Rest Area, complete with detailed maps of the facility layout. But her smartphone GPS indicated she was driving through empty forest with no roads or structures nearby. Two different GPS systems were showing completely contradictory information about the same location. Penelope tried to resolve the discrepancy by asking other travelers about the rest area. The responses were unsettling. A family from Nevada told her they'd been stopping at Silverbrook for years during their annual trips to Tahoe. A truck driver mentioned it was his favorite rest area on this route, always clean and well stocked. But when Penelope asked them to point out the rest area on their own GPS devices, their systems showed the same thing hers did: empty forest. "That's weird," said the truck driver, staring at his GPS screen. "It shows I'm in the middle of nowhere, but we're obviously at the rest area. Technology, right?" Everyone at the facility was experiencing the same GPS malfunction, yet none of them seemed particularly concerned about it. They accepted the contradiction as a minor technical glitch rather than an impossibility that defied the fundamental nature of reality. But Penelope noticed other inconsistencies. The vending machines dispensed products with expiration dates from different decades, some from the 1990s, others from years in the future. The restroom mirrors reflected the facility accurately, but showed weather outside that didn't match the clear evening Penelope had been driving through. Most disturbing was the guest registry book near the information kiosk. Penelope flipped through pages of signatures from visitors dating back to 1987, but the entries weren't chronological. Signatures from 2019 appeared next to entries from 1995, followed by dates from 2007. People had been visiting Silverbrook Rest Area across multiple decades, but not in any order that made temporal sense. And then Penelope found her own signature in the book, dated 3 weeks in the future, with a note written in her handwriting: "GPS malfunction led me here again. Still can't find it on official maps. This is my 4th visit." The pattern is becoming clear. Penelope had never been to Silverbrook before, yet according to this registry, she would return multiple times over the coming weeks. Her future self had left detailed notes about ongoing GPS inconsistencies and unexplained return visits to a facility that officially didn't exist. Panicked, Penelope rushed back to her car and attempted to leave immediately. Her car's GPS showed a clear route back to the main highway, but when she tried to follow it, the roads led her in circles around the rest area property. No matter which direction she drove, every path returned her to the same parking lot. After an hour of increasingly frantic attempts to leave, Penelope parked and tried to call for help. Her phone showed no signal, but when she dialed 911, the call connected immediately. The dispatcher confirmed her location as somewhere near Highway 80, but couldn't locate any rest area called Silverbrook in their system. "Ma'am, according to our maps, you're calling from an empty stretch of forest. Are you sure about your location?" At exactly 11:47 p.m., Penelope's GPS suddenly announced a recalculating route to original destination. The screen flickered, and she found herself back on Highway 80, approaching the area where the Silverbrook exit should have been. There was no exit ramp, no rest area, just dark forest on both sides of the highway. Penelope completed her drive to Lake Tahoe, but she couldn't stop thinking about the impossible rest area. When she returned home, she researched every official database she could find. No Silverbrook rest area had ever been constructed along Highway 80. No plans, no permits, no maintenance records existed for any facility at that location. But 3 weeks later, just as the registry book had predicted, Penelope's GPS malfunctioned again in exactly the same way. Turn right to Silverbrook rest area for optimal road efficiency. This time, she didn't turn. She continued straight, ignoring her GPS increasingly insistent recalculation attempts. Her car's navigation system malfunctioned permanently after that night, constantly trying to route her to locations that didn't exist. Penelope had to replace it with a new GPS unit, but sometimes, late at night on empty highways, the new device would flicker and briefly display a familiar message: Silverbrook rest area, next right. Penelope never followed those directions again, but she kept detailed records of each occurrence. According to her logs, her GPS still tries to guide her to Silverbrook exactly once every 3 weeks. Always at night, always on stretches of highway where no rest areas should exist. This rest stop only appears when someone is about to die. The Eternal Journey rest area doesn't appear on any maps, can't be found by searching, and only becomes visible to travelers who have less than 24 hours left to live. Ezekiel Hawthorne discovered this when the facility materialized out of nowhere during what would become his final drive. Ezekiel was a healthy 34-year-old accountant driving home from a business conference in Phoenix. He felt fine, had no health problems, and was looking forward to seeing his family after a week away. But at 11:58 p.m., as he drove through a desolate stretch of Arizona highway, a rest area appeared that he'd never seen before despite traveling this route monthly for 5 years. The sign read, Eternal Journey Rest Area, Final Stop, which seemed like an odd name for a highway facility. But Ezekiel was tired and needed to use the restroom, so he pulled into the well-lit parking lot. The rest area was busier than he expected for such a late hour, with dozens of cars and travelers moving quietly between the facilities. But something felt different about the other visitors. They moved with a strange sense of purpose, as if they all shared knowledge that Ezekiel didn't possess. Conversations were conducted in hushed tones, and everyone seemed to be waiting for something important to happen. The facility itself was unlike any rest area Ezekiel had ever seen. It was immaculately maintained, with amenities that seemed designed for comfort rather than mere convenience. Soft chairs, warm lighting, peaceful music, and a general atmosphere of serenity that felt more like a luxury hotel than a highway stop. But the most unusual feature was a large information board near the entrance that displayed what looked like departure times, similar to those at an airport or train station. Names were listed next to times, and Ezekiel was disturbed to see his own name, Ezekiel Hawthorne Departure, 12:47 a.m. Confused and increasingly concerned, Ezekiel approached the information desk where a kind elderly woman was providing assistance to travelers. She smiled warmly when she saw him approaching. "First time at Eternal Journey?" she asked gently. "It can be a bit overwhelming. You're right on schedule, though. Departure in about 40 minutes. Departure for where?" Ezekiel asked. "I'm just driving home to Tucson." The woman's expression became compassionate but serious. "Oh, honey, you're not driving anywhere after this stop. Eternal Journey only appears when it's time for the final departure. You're here because your journey is ending tonight." Ezekiel felt a chill of terror, but the woman continued speaking in the same gentle tone. "Car accident at 12:47 a.m., about 15 miles down the highway. Drunk driver runs a red light at the Route 83 intersection. You won't see it coming and you won't suffer. But your time in this world ends tonight." "That's impossible," Ezekiel said, backing away from the desk. "You can't know that. You can't predict accidents." "We don't predict them," the woman replied sadly. "We just provide a comfortable place to wait before they happen. Everyone here is scheduled to depart tonight. Some from accidents, others from heart attacks, medical emergencies, or simply reaching the end of their natural span. Eternal journey appears when people need a peaceful moment before the transition. Ezekiel looked around at the other travelers with new understanding. A middle-aged businessman sat quietly reading a magazine, occasionally checking his watch. A young mother was hugging her children goodbye, though they couldn't see or hear her. An elderly man was writing letters at a table, tears streaming down his face. "You mean everyone here is going to die tonight?" Ezekiel whispered. "Everyone who can see this place, yes. It's a gift, really. Most people don't get advance warning. They don't get a chance to prepare, to reflect, to find peace with their departure. Eternal journey gives you that opportunity." Ezekiel spent the next 30 minutes in a state of surreal acceptance. He called his wife and children, telling them he loved them without mentioning why he was calling so late. He wrote a letter explaining his final wishes and leaving messages of love for family members. He found himself strangely comforted by the facility's peaceful atmosphere and the quiet companionship of others facing the same transition. At 12:45 a.m., the woman at the information desk made an announcement. "Final boarding call for all 12:47 departures. Please proceed to your vehicles." Ezekiel walked to his car in a daze, still not entirely believing what he'd been told. As he drove back onto the highway, he checked his rearview mirror and watched the Eternal Journey rest area fade from view, disappearing as completely as if it had never existed. At 12:47 a.m., exactly as predicted, a drunk driver ran a red light at the Route 83 intersection. Ezekiel never saw the other vehicle. The collision was instantaneous and fatal. But according to the accident report, witnesses said Ezekiel looked strangely peaceful in his final moments, as if he had been expecting what was about to happen. The highway patrol found several unusual items in Ezekiel's car: a letter addressed to his family that contained specific instructions for his funeral and final wishes, a receipt from a rest area called Eternal Journey that showed a timestamp of 12:15 a.m. 47 minutes before his time of death, and a small brochure with information about preparing for life transitions, printed on paper that felt ancient yet appeared freshly made. No rest area called Eternal Journey has ever existed along that stretch of highway, but sometimes, late at night, travelers report seeing rest area signs that disappear when they get closer. Highway authorities dismiss these reports as fatigue-induced hallucinations, but they keep detailed records of each sighting, because sometimes the reports are made by people who die in accidents within hours of the sighting. People who, according to witnesses, seemed unusually peaceful and prepared for their final moments, as if they had received advance warning of their departure. The Eternal Journey rest area remains invisible to most travelers. It only appears when someone needs one final moment of peace before beginning their ultimate journey. And for those who are granted this final gift, the transition from life becomes not an ending, but simply the next departure on an eternal itinerary. These 11 stories prove that rest stops are more than simple highway conveniences. They're places where the boundaries between realities become thin, where time behaves differently, and where encounters occur that challenge everything we think we know about the world. If you've experienced something unexplainable at a rest stop, share your story in the comments below. You're not alone, and your experience might be the key to understanding these phenomena. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to never miss our investigations into the unexplained. And remember, the next time you stop at a rest area during a long drive, pay attention to the details around you. Notice the other travelers, check your phone's behavior, and trust your instincts if something feels wrong. Because, as these stories prove, some rest stops offer more than just a place to rest. They offer glimpses into realities that exist parallel to our own. Sweet dreams and drive safely. You never know what might be waiting at the next rest stop.